All right.
1 o'clock, should we kick it off?
We are live on Facebook, so we should be ready to go.
Folks, good afternoon. Welcome again to our eighth annual.
No,
weekly.
Peter, please.
I know, I've dropped the ball there. I'm Peter Keller. I'm the head of the EC board. On today's call, we want to focus on the time horizon that we foresee for the COVID crisis. You know, it seems like it's been going on for a long time already, but and it has, but the staff and the board and the advisory committee are all now evaluating the needs that are apparent to us out in the field right now, while we also look to the days and the months ahead, and we do all expect it will be months ahead. We're working to more fully quantify the financial resources that we'll need to continue to support all of our programs for the duration of this pandemic and for the economic disruption that we suspect will linger long after the health crisis is passed. We know that we're all in this for the long haul. Patrick Bergquist, our program director, has put together a great short PowerPoint that he previewed for some program directors yesterday, and it gives some perspective on where we have been, what our current situation is, and all that we have to consider as we prepare for the way forward. Yesterday, I suspect many of you saw the head of the CDC and Dr. Fauci, the leading infectious disease expert, testify before a Senate panel, and their comments certainly are very sobering and in pretty stark contrast to what we're hearing from the administration. They really laid out the real challenges as we seek to return to a state of at least semi-normal, and more importantly, the very, very significant health risks that we expose ourselves and people to if we go to business as usual and open up too soon. I mean, Dr. Fauci spoke about potential for a real spike in infections and a real spike in death. And we all would like to get back to the way things used to be, but we also know that if we jump the gun on this, there'll be a very significant toll in terms of human health and suffering. And that in turn will lead to just more economic disruption. So let me turn it over to Patrick, and he'll give you a little bit of an update on what he and we see coming up in the months ahead. So Patrick, it's all yours.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. I'm going to share a couple of slides up here. I'm very much a visual person, and so as we were thinking about, we're trying to figure out how to plan in this pandemic, how to prepare ourselves, our programs, all of our people that we support, because we know that this is going to be a long-term project that we're in right now in our response to COVID-19. So let me share just a couple of slides here to kind of give a visualization of what we're thinking about and kind of how we're processing things here. Okay. So what we've kind of come up with is kind of the language of a cycle. If we remember back to like Superstorm Sandy, it was a particular event that happened at a particular day and time, right? So it had a start and it had a finish. And then we entered into the phase of recovery, and we were able to kind of move through those phases of recovery. So it was kind of like it was a very linear process. Like it started here and it ended over here, right? Well, because of the nature of the pandemic, it's a large scale thing that is continuing to happen. And it's a thing that keeps adjusting and coming in waves back and forth. And so I thought a way of kind of presenting this visually is to look at it as if it's a cycle. So we'll start kind of at the top left of shock, going into fight, open, normalization, close. And then what I would suggest is we're going to be going back into shock, back into fight, back into open at varying degrees. So even in this cycle, we're going to be moving forward at times, and we're going to be moving backwards to kind of back up and try something again before we can move forward again. And so there's a real fluidity with this model that I think is helpful for us to understand as we're looking to plan out our response in the immediate need, in the medium, and the long-term time frames. So let me just run through a couple of thoughts on kind of how we're thinking about this pandemic. The first phase we put up there is shock. And this was in those initial moments when we're like, there's a pandemic? Oh, that is going to have an impact on us. Oh, we have to work from home now? Oh, we've lost our job now? And there's a real sense of fear that happens, and we become very reactionary to that fear. right? So if you see on the bottom left, we all rushed out, and many of us who had resources were most tempted to rush out and buy everything, to begin hoarding everything from the grocery stores. That actually had a massive impact on the emergency food network that we can talk about at another time. But in that shock, we're also realizing within a matter of days, we were going from, oh, well, we'll be going to church, but maybe we'll have to sit apart from each other, to whole empty churches. The shock of having to see our public school system shut down and the radical impact that actually had on people. So we have this first phase of shock of just, oh my goodness, what is happening? How do we respond? And that moves us into the second phase I'm calling fight, where it's almost as if we're like, okay, this is actually happening and now we have to do something. And so this was that first wave of response. We figured out social distancing. We all had to kind of stop going into work. We're putting on masks. We use language all the time of how do we kind of flatten this curve, right? And bring that curve down. Well, we've begun to do that. I will reflect, it's one of the hardest experience, it's one of the most energy consuming experiences we have are in these first two movements of shock and fight, because the adrenaline goes up so much. And so we're like, okay, we're going to figure this out. We're going to get back to it. When in actuality, this is not a short-term issue that calls for big bursts of energy, but it's a much more long-term sustained response that we have to have. This bottom left-hand picture in this fight is what our programs did. They started responding in incredible ways. This is actually out at St. Bart's. I believe it was on Easter Sunday morning, where that line of people were standing in line for breakfast, and it wrapped around a city block. So the first movement of shock, the second movement of fight. I'm calling the third movement open. And again, because the nature of this model is about fluidity, open is not a moment. Open is a process. This graphic shows that in New York State, the governor has kind of created 10 regions within the state. And for a particular region to open up into the first phase, they have to meet a certain number of metrics. So there's 7 metrics that they have to make. Now, this image was from a couple days ago, but now it looks like there are 3 regions up in the upstate area, in the Finger Lakes area, that are going to begin to open up because they've met these 7 criteria. Well, we have to remember that this opening is only opening up the first phase. There's 4 phases of opening up. So just because you've opened up the first phase doesn't mean you're going to automatically go to the second phase right away. So there's this ebb and this flow. And we know for the Diocese of New York, we represent 2 regions. That's the New York City region and the Mid-Hudson region, that we're not opening up in that first phase for a while. Here's an image that we put together of just what these phases include. I want to focus in just for a moment on the third phase of restaurants and food service, because I think this is a good example. It's not just food service, but these are like hospitality industries. These are line cooks, bussers, people that bust your table at a restaurant, cleaners for offices, those kinds of things. That begins to open back up. But we know that vast, like tons of those jobs are not coming back. Restaurants have to have almost 90% occupancy to survive in New York. Well, now in social distancing, if we're only saying they're at 50% occupancy, they won't open up. And so there we have this longer term and exaggerated experience of the pandemic for so many of those hourly workers, cash workers, those kinds of things are going to be suffering in a really significant way for a very long time. The fourth movement I put down is kind of normalizing. We're like, okay, we're figuring out how to do this, but we're also entering into a normalizing experience of realizing that the jobless rates may start going down some, but we've created a floor for them. We've created a new floor where they're not going to go below that floor very much. And so we're getting used to the systems we're living into are getting used to that. In this normalization, we're seeing that people are burning through their cash reserves, through any kind of savings that they actually do have. They're disappearing very quickly. And, we're learning what life is like on Zoom. Like the hours we're spending, the times in our parishes that they're doing worship and Bible study, those are really positive things that we're kind of figuring out what life looks like now versus what it looked like a few months ago. The other thing I think is going to be really important for us to realize in this kind of normalizing phase as we've opened up, it's from the CDC last week, is that the projected death rate is going to continue to go up. So what part of the new normal that we have to begin to experience is, how do we deal with death? How do our programs deal with it? How do we deal with mortality in a different way? And again, there's a lot of fear in all of this. Finally, the fifth movement is what I'm calling close, in which we're going back again, and whether it's another spike in COVID-19 cases, as happened with the Spanish flu, or if it's another spike in the economic downturn, there's going to be waves of kind of panic, in which the economy is going to kind of grow and then contract and grow and contract. And those contraction moments are really significant and have a massive impact on the lives of so many people that we work with. So as we're looking at Episcopal Charities, we're trying to kind of gauge out what this looks like for 18 months. We've been working on projections with how much money we think it's going to cost our programs, how we have to resource our programs in different ways, with volunteers, expertise, staffing, those kinds of things. But this is a long-term thing. And so one of our concerns right now is, how do we help our programs make it through the long term of this experience? Because the need is profound with so many people right now. And our programs are struggling to figure out how best to respond. Even so far in our COVID-19 fund, most of our programs who've been applying have been applying based on the next 2 to 3 months. And so we're seeing this long-term impact that we're going to be having here. So I hope this is helpful. It's helpful just to kind of see that even when we open, we're not really open. We all have a hope that this thing will be done at a certain point. And it will, but not really. And it's surely not going to be done this summer. So that's in the program office and Episcopal Charities as a whole on the board, is what we're trying to think through, plan for, and discern how to move forward with that. So to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. That's a great overview, and I think one of the things we want to assure you is that we are really working very, very tirelessly. We know just how important our programs are to so many people in normal times, but the stress that we're all seeing now is really severe. And as we've all said many, many times before, these stresses of a pandemic tend to fall most on those who can least afford it, who have the least in terms of financial and emotional and moral support. And so I just want you all to know that we are planning, as Patrick said, not just for the near term, but longer term. There'll be ramifications from this that go on for years. Reports keep coming into us about still increasing demand for services at a lot of our programs, particularly the feeding programs. They're seeing more people seeking assistance, and including a lot of people that have never come to feeding programs before. Every Friday, we have an emergency fund committee that meets, and we will meet again this upcoming Friday to review the latest batch of requests for assistance. And I'm quite certain we'll be approving additional grants. To date, we've funded 15 different emergency grants totaling almost $156,000. We know that this need is going to be larger than we can fund internally. So our staff, Elizabeth Starling and the rest of the staff, have been working to submit grant requests to some larger organizations. And in the last 10 days, they've submitted 3 requests that we think will help give us the funds we need to continue to offer emergency grants to programs. These outside funds will augment the support we've got from so many of our longtime supporters. We're very appreciative of all those who've stepped in to offer donations to help us in this just absolutely critical work. We still need more help. So if you're looking for a way to help, if you go to our website, you'll see several tabs, but we still are looking for additional financial support. Volunteer needs continue to remain high. Patrick has said many times, this is a marathon, and we're very concerned about volunteers burning out. We're concerned that people are operating at a pace that isn't sustainable. So we would love to add more people to our roster, particularly any of those out there who've had the virus and may now have at least some limited immunity. Again, our website, www.ec-ny.org, has got some pretty easy to find tabs that will let you know how you can pitch in and help. There are an awful lot of people in the tri-state region and across the country doing amazing work. Many of you might have seen Robin Hood's big thing on Tuesday night. And the generosity that we see is really inspiring and really heartening. But we contrast that with some of the real significant need we see across our diocese. So with that, let me turn it over to you all for questions. We hope to answer anything you can ask. Also want to let you know that following today's call, we're going to switch to doing these calls every other week instead of doing them on a weekly basis. So our next call will be Wednesday, May 27th, 2 weeks from today. But right now, SK, do we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, there is a question about how the church sort of fits into the phases of reopening, and what the timing it looks like for each phase, and whether or not soft openings are possible.
Well, I think you've seen the bishop announced a couple of weeks ago, all of our churches are closed at least until July 1st. It would not at all surprise me if we go beyond that date. You all may have seen yesterday, the State University System in California, which is the nation's largest, has announced they will not be opening live in the fall. They'll be doing virtual classes across the Cal State system in the fall. I suspect we're going to see a lot of that. So, the bishop will keep updating our website, but we're a minimum of July 1st. I know a lot of local school districts are making contingency plans if they're not able to open classrooms come the Tuesday after Labor Day. So a lot of this is fluid, but the website for the diocese is updated regularly. In addition to news feeds, there are wonderful periodic meditations by all three of our bishops. So check in on that. But we've also mentioned before, because ours is such a large diocese, geographically large, geographically dispersed, we would certainly expect that churches in the far western regions, the Monticellos, the Calicoons, the northern regions, the Amenias, Millbrooks, they likely will open before the churches in the city, before the churches in Westchester, where we've got obviously higher concentrations of people and a population that is much more reliant on public transportation, which I think is what freaks a lot of people out. The thought of the subways anytime soon is a scary thought. So I think we'll see a phase opening across our diocese.
Yeah, and I heard an update this morning from the bishops Shen and Glasspool at a meeting, and they are working with teams to try to figure out what it looks like even when parishes open. They've said that they will be following the guidelines of the CDC, of Governor Cuomo, and of kind of local county executives and those kinds of things as to how big of a group can gather together for worship. They said they will be following all of those guidelines. And
I think we'll see those guidelines, but I think there'll also be churches where the rectors and the program directors at our churches know their populations the best, and we may be in a place where the state says it's safe to open in Ulster County, but you might find a rector who simply says, I'm not comfortable opening and having my people come into a place where we could put them in danger.
SK, I think the last little bit of that question was something to the effect of, like, each phase is really not built in as a month or a certain set of time.
Yeah.
Is that it's very much in flux and it's going back and forth all the time. Also, I see that they've had their kitchen program has gone up by 38%, which is significant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one reason, Patrick mentioned a longer term horizon. But as we talk to people about need for emergency assistance, we lined out earlier this week a budget that runs through the end of this year. It may go longer than that, but we encourage you, if you've got needs, don't think in terms of 1 or 2 or 3 months, because we recognize that even when the public health element of this is passed, there'll be an employment element that goes longer than that. So you're going to see, we know, bigger numbers at your feeding programs well past the reopening of the economy. So reach out to us, let us know, and we're going to do our best to try to get money into the field so that you can continue to provide the absolutely critical services you're providing.
I don't see any other questions at this point.
Okay, well, if that's it, thank you again for dialing in. I remind you one more time, stay healthy, stay safe, stay distant, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks. Until then, thanks for all you're doing to help people in need across the diocese.